Hi, and welcome back to another Lonely Mountain Snow Riders editor tutorial video. As you may know by now, paths are the cornerstone of any trail that you are going to be building. We already went through the basics of paths a few videos ago, but now we're going to explore a bit more of what the Paths tool has to offer. For that, I am going to rebuild this path that was done for this very short trail. At first, just by using the basic tools that we already know. Now that I have built a path again, I can go over the few options for paths that I have not explained yet. First off, the height mode. If you're familiar with the terrain flattening brush, you may expect what the height mode is going to be doing for the paths. If we go to the last option of our inspector for the paths, we see that height is set to flatten. This means that the terrain is going to go exactly where the path is. However, we have two other options, either rise or lower. If we select lower, the path will only influence terrain that is higher than where it is, sinking it down. So far, our path did not change too much since it was mostly below the terrain anyway. However, if I pull the first point far high up, you will start to notice that it will stop taking effect the moment I go over the terrain. Like that. Consequently, if we select rise, it will do the exact opposite. Instead of sinking the terrain, it will rise whichever terrain is below the path, and every other piece of terrain will stay as it is, as you can see. If I sink this here, the terrain will start taking priority over the path, since the path is not raising the terrain at that point. There may be some situations where switching between these modes may be convenient. In this scenario, I would actually like to keep the flatten mode, so everything is affected. Next up, I wish there was a way to snap this point back to the ground instead of having it floating above it and not really connecting properly. Well, actually, there is. And it's very straightforward. There is this button that says move to ground, and it will immediately snap set point to the ground. If we have multiple points selected that are above the ground and click move to the ground, it will snap all of them to the ground. Right next to it, we have the align selected points button. If we click it, it will interpolate the points height between the start and end points, just like this. Our points have now become a lot more uniform. This can help you make paths that transition smoother. However, you may still have to tweak some curve lines a bit, for example in this point. But now we have the certainty that this middle point is right in the height middle of this first one and this last one. Now let's explore a feature of the points, using this point as an example. What I'm going to show you now is called the sloping path. It is the last option that shows up when you select any point. And it basically just tilts the spline on that point. As you can see, we can go tilt it to the right or to the left. Tilting terrain can create some very interesting riding experiences. So if we leave it slightly tilted to the right, it will help us take that curve sliding inwards. We can go to the play mode to see how that looks like. As you saw while I was riding, it was very noticeable how the tilted curve is affecting the riding experience. Of course, because the path is not baked yet, I hit a strange bump that I will have to look into after I bake the whole path. Next up, we have the transition width of the points. As you see, the borders between paths and the rest of the mountain are not usually very natural, but we can take these pink points and stretch them out so the transition looks a bit better. Just as with the purple points, we can stretch them while holding control and both sides will go at the same time. We can also select multiple points by holding shift and modify their transition width simultaneously. However, keep in mind that editing multiple points at the same time can affect performance of the editor. Next up, you can select a point of the path and click on the split button. The path will be split right on that point, giving you two paths. Now we can edit the different splines independently, and I could take this chance to, for example, create a gap here and make a jump. If for some reason I want to have two of the same splines identically looking, I could duplicate the spline, and now I have a clone, and I can do with it whatever I want without modifying the original spline. I could just put it on the side of this one, and let's say make it smaller. But just have it follow the same path. Next up, we can reverse a path. Reversing a path will invert which one is the starting point and end point. Although reversing is generally more useful for river splines, it also has some effects on path splines. For instance, it will of course reverse which one is the end and start of the path, so the elongate paths buttons will interact differently. Since now my start is the one on the bottom, and if I click this button, it will elongate it that way. But also, the path width and transition width of each of the points will be mirrored if we reverse a spline. So if I pull this one very far to the left and now reverse this path, the long side will now be on the right. And remember, when you're done with paths, you can bake them, so you can interact with them with the terrain sculpting tools and smooth them into the terrain. Now would be a good moment to talk about path bake priority. The newest paths on your list will always take priority above the paths that are older in your list. However, if we bake the newest path, that path will be gone. And you will see that the older path, which is path 000, which was overlapping its clone, will now bring the terrain up again to where it is. Even though you cannot usually bring back a path once you bake it, you can still do Ctrl Z to bring it back. With this in mind, you usually would want to bake paths in the same order as they appear on your list. So older paths that are overlapping with newer paths do not change the way you intended your level to look like. Now let's bake all the paths in order to obtain the same results that we are looking at right now, just with baked paths. And finally, as you should always do when you bake paths, I am going to go with the smoothing brush around them and connect them better to the terrain. And now we can play this level with our new advanced baked paths. Of course, we modified the terrain quite a bit, so let's try to ignore the floating props. And this will be the end of this tutorial. I hope you find interesting and creative ways to use the advanced options that the path tools give you. I'm looking forward to seeing fun terrain in your levels, and with that being said, I will see you in the next one.